All right, it's now 8:30 right here on Morning Express, and we're into the final segment of the show. Now, a new survey has revealed that children in Kenya could be acting in pornography, knowingly or not. The survey conducted by a Dutch child rights organization indicates that Kenyan children are actively sharing nude photos with strangers online. The problem has been compounded by the availability of internet at home and on mobile phones. Teres de Homes, Netherlands, has worked in Kenya since 1968, found out that children are being abused online where they are coerced or forced to perform acts in front of webcams or mobile phone cameras. The report will be released tomorrow in Nairobi, and in studio this morning to give us a heads up or a sample is Angela Siombua Nyamo, the County Director for Teres de Homes in Netherlands. Good morning and thank you for joining us. First of all, the pronunciation of that, I need to get that right. How do you pronounce that?
Teres de Homes.
Teres de Homes.
It's a French name.
Okay, Teres de Homes. Okay, there you go. So thank you, Angela, for joining us. Now, maybe just let's start with the findings, which, again, I'll refer to the article that we have on page 3 of the Standard this morning, which are rather scary for many parents, that your child could be acting in porn movies behind your back.
Well, I mean, before we go into the findings, maybe a little bit of background into what we do and how we came about this work. So Teres de Homes Netherlands is a Dutch child rights organization, and our work mainly is structured around stopping child exploitation. So we have been working in Kenya specifically to address commercial sexual exploitation, broader commercial sexual exploitation work, and child trafficking. And there's a very close link between child trafficking and commercial sexual exploitation. So in our work, of course, we look at the growth of the internet and internet connectivity, and we have seen that children are more and more exposed to internet, so to speak. And where we work in other countries, for example, in the Philippines, the same environment, the growth in ICT opened doors to actually children being sexually exploited online, including live, online sexual exploitation. And so we asked ourselves, if the same environment still exists in Kenya as it exists in the Philippines, what is the likelihood that children in Kenya are also at risk of being
exposed to the same dangers?
Exactly. And so we did this assessment to look into what the possibilities could be. And indeed, there were strong indications that it is actually happening in Kenya.
All right. Now, to the findings and possibly just to give us a picture of where we are.
Well, of course, we had to look at organizations like the Communications Authority, for example. We had to talk to other NGOs who are working on child rights issues. And we know a couple of them, like, for example, Mtoto Watch and the Cradle, they're doing quite a bit of work also in relation to that. So based on the work that we have been doing, we went to conduct this assessment, so to speak. And we did come up with some, I wouldn't call them alarming, so to speak, but pointers that something needs to be done. So the things that we unearthed, like what could be the possible forms of exploitation, online sexual exploitation that exists in Kenya. First was sexting, which is very common, where children can actually, take photos on their phones, nude or semi-nude, and send them or distribute them to friends.
And this is to friends. It can be amongst themselves.
It can be amongst themselves. And then if something is already generated and sent via the internet, you have no control over where it goes.
It's out there.
It's out there, and it can be used. The whole idea of sexting, first of all, maybe I need to clarify, may not necessarily be itself an outright online child sexual exploitation, but the fact that the material that is produced can actually be used online to, sexually exploit children, then yes, it contributes to online sexual exploitation. And then there is grooming, where adults are online, talking and soliciting for sexual acts with children. So the contact and creating that familiarity with a child creates an opportunity for possible exploitation. Then, of course, there's, if you look at it as a gradual development, then there's what you'd call the hardcore, which is a live online streaming of sexual
content
acts, where children would stand in front of a webcam or a camera on phone and perform sexual acts, and there are people who are willing to buy that or to sell it, for that matter.
Okay, and maybe it might be important for us to define online sexual exploitation, because it could be so wide, but what exactly do you mean when you talk about online sexual exploitation?
I mean, we cannot define online sexual exploitation without looking at what sexual exploitation is, the commercial sense of
aspect of it, yeah.
Yeah. So basically, there are many definitions that exist, but we work with, the internationally agreed upon definitions by the Interagency Working Group on Sexual Exploitation of Children. And sexual exploitation of children basically is the exchange of, cash or kind for sexual activity with children. Bottom line. So including things like child prostitution or transactional sex, or development of pornographic material for sale and distribution where someone else is gaining cash or favors at the expense of the child. So it's basically taking advantage of the child's vulnerability. And the vulnerability could be brought about by social factors. So for example, a child who's been orphaned, they are less, they have fewer opportunities in life because they don't have that kind of provision, so to speak. There could be other social factors like cultural practices. For example, if a child lives in a community where, for example, child marriage is very rife, it means that their age of sexual debut is pretty young. And so they are exposed to sex and sexuality at a pretty young age in a very negative sense, so to speak. So there are all these things that would drive children into sexual exploitation, or that would predispose them to sexual exploitation. So
okay, and from the survey that you've been conducting, when we talk about children, what are the age groups we're looking at here?
Of course, we have to go back to the definition of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. Who is a child? A child is clearly defined, and that is also provided for in the Children's Act of 2001 in Kenya, that a child is anyone who's below 18 years. But in the context of online sexual exploitation, the age groups that have been identified to be more at risk is 11 to 17. But then we also throw in, what would you call it? An observation, so to speak, that the age group between 14 and 17, or 15 and 17 thereabout, is more at risk.
Okay.
Yeah.
And maybe for the benefit of anybody who's watching, a parent especially, or a guardian, and they would want to understand how this works, because I try to imagine that it's subtle, and the child may probably want to keep this away from their guardian. It's not something that you'll stumble across unless you look out for telltale signs. How do they, what's the procedure? How do they get exploited, and where does it begin?
Okay, like you're saying, sometimes it can begin very subtly, like in a very subtle way. It's, the child actually having access to an internet-enabled phone, which is not necessarily a bad thing. That's something that I want to underline.
There's positive use of internet.
Exactly.
And in the day and age we're living in, we cannot escape the fact that they will use the internet one time or the other.
And it's important for them to use it and know how to navigate, because they've been born in that age anyway.
Right.
But if as a parent, you need to be aware that there are actually some risks that your child could come across on the internet. So it begins with having access to an internet-enabled phone, or your house or your home is fully
Wi-Fi
connected.
Enabled, yeah.
Exactly. And so that already creates an environment where the child begins to interact with the world
internet.
out there. It's a world out there, and the world out there, unfortunately, the internet does not have geographical jurisdiction, so to speak. So it's the world out there. Secondly, how much time does your child spend on, gadgets?
On that gadget.
Exactly. You give them a phone, and they're forever on the phone. Means that they're more exposed or more at risk than children who don't have, a lot of
access.
Exactly. And then which sites do they go to, for example? Have you put, security measures that there are some particular signs that your child will not go to? There are public chat rooms that exist, and some of them are designed for young people, and there are specific rules and regulations of how to, if you're going to be chatting on this, chat room, then these are the regulations. But who's checking that? Again, because we've seen that from the study, there are about 750,000 adults who are looking for children. And where do they go? Public chat rooms that sometimes are meant for children. So you'll find them there. Knowing where your child is going, like their virtual footprint, so to speak, and putting restrictions to that.
And I'm guessing there are mechanisms that are in place to, one, secure your internet connection, two, to even follow up. Like cookies where you can look at the digital print of where the child has been.
Yeah.
Okay.
They're there. They exist. It's just that, and one of the things that we also found out actually is that children would, and young people would actually not go to their parents for information on, the internet or clarifying information that they have found out. They would first go to their peers. And so as a parent, you would want to create that environment where your child actually comes to you, to speak to you and to clarify. And that begins right from, a young age. I mean, as Terrorism, we have tried as much as possible to develop what we call the smart use of the internet for children. So it's basically, being safe on the internet. What does it mean to be safe? I don't share personal information, for example. I make sure that I have my password and it is not accessible to other people who can easily hack and, put some explicit information in there or, start looking for me online. Then think twice about, what you post and where you post it as a child. And then, because usually when someone meets you online, they would first solicit for a physical meeting, for example.
Right.
Either they would try to, talk you into sexual acts online, if you're in front of a webcam or videos, or take a photo of your nude, send it to me, things like that. But there are others who would actually go a step further and, organize for a meeting. One of the things we found out when we did the assessment, especially in Mombasa, where we know child sex tourism is rife, so to speak, there are foreigners who would be looking for children online to make the first contact before they actually come here to meet physically.
Or before they even travel.
Yes, yes. So that is highlighted also in the report. And then talking about how to be safe online, when you're going to meet a stranger that you have met online, you need at least to be aware that you need the consent of your parent. Of course, that may not necessarily work if someone is trying to hide something.
To do it behind your back.
Exactly. Yeah. But then as parents, we need to create that environment. Now, I'm talking about these safe measures for parents who are present and have provided that, protective and present environment with their children. The children who don't have that privilege, so to speak, if they come from a very vulnerable background where perhaps, they're orphaned or there's too much poverty, they have to go out and fend for the family, then being online presents an opportunity where they can actually be able to get money, perform sexual acts to get money and put food on the table. So I would say there are two divides, so to speak. In as much as the internet poses threats for all children, there are some that are more at risk than others. Others because, parents just need to be present in their lives, and others because they're vulnerable and therefore they have to fend for the family and they find themselves in that scenario. Or sometimes because of the poverty, the parents actually do encourage some of them to go out. And
okay. Now, we'll come to legislation and possibly what role the government plays in all this, but for understanding's sake, are there certain telltale signs that one can look out for to tell that your child is possibly getting drawn into it? Because I'm imagining that pornography for a child is pretty hardcore for anyone, really. But they don't get there overnight. It's something that possibly has a way of going. So is there a way of parents possibly monitoring, apart from now the digital print, and maybe behavior or certain things that may change in the child that could tell you this is now a red light on the dashboard?
There are, and it's almost the same with other telltale signs of knowing if a child is actually being abused. They could be, it's about the language. What kind of language are they using, you know? And as a parent, you can actually be able to see the changes because you know how your child talks.
Right.
So when they start using some explicit words, then that is a sign that something could have changed or something is happening. Secondly, if they are exhibiting almost very aggressive kind of behavior or very sexualized kind of behavior, you know, the way they talk, the way they dress, the way they act, it could be...
Possibly even their gestures and things like
exactly.
that, yeah.
So those could be telltale signs. Again, you know, the kind of friends they're keeping also. You can actually be able to see the signs.
Okay, I guess it would also be helpful for parents to ensure that when your child is on the internet, they are in the full glare of everybody else, because that way, obviously, they'll not get to the point where they're nude, but you can also tell that there's something going on.
Yes, certainly. I mean, you also need to have some kind of rules of, okay, if you're going to be using the internet, it's, you know, for this amount of, you know, time, hours or something, it has to be in an open environment. Unfortunately, I mean, and I say this with a lot of emphasis because maybe regular is not the word to use, but for parents who are present and they provide and they're not struggling, so to speak, it is just a question... Struggling financially, I must underline, or struggling to, you know, meet the basic needs of the family, school, food, just the basic needs. It is easy because it is about information and control and being present. But for parents and caregivers who are struggling to put food on the table, it is a different ballgame altogether. Because in some instances, exactly, and in some instances, it's the parents and the caregivers who actually push the children into...
To bring in some form of income.
Exactly.
All right, we need to wind up in just a bit, but you have a report that is being launched tomorrow.
Yes.
Maybe tell us a little bit about that.
Well, like we said, some of the findings have already been highlighted in the article. But maybe a little bit of background. I mean, in our work when we're doing, or we have been doing sexual exploitation, we've come across, you know, the indications of online, you know, sexual exploitation. And we just wanted to understand how big of a problem is it in Kenya. So that's one of the main objectives of the study. Now, the other objective was basically to look at what is the policy environment like, and is it ready really to address online child sexual exploitation? What are the services that exist? Because some of these children, if you look at the consequences of sexual exploitation and online sexual exploitation, some of them have, you know, lifelong consequences where these children actually need counseling and constant support to actually be able to get out of it, if ever they actually get out of it. So just to understand what service provision exists in Kenya to be able to address the needs of these children. So those were broadly the objectives of the study. Okay. And it's I wouldn't say we have very concrete statistics, so to speak, because the subject itself is very sensitive. It's not like looking at how many children are actually going to school. Right. That's different. This is, you know, children opening up to, you know, what it is that they have experienced. We did interview a couple of children, and they did indicate that this is actually happening. Now, what I would like to underline also or underscore is this report points to the need for more robust study. Almost to the point of having a scientific or academic study, so to speak, to really be able to understand what are the gaps.
All right. And we'll have to wind up there because of time. I guess it's one of the challenges that we have now because of the age that we're living in. It's no longer what would have been referred to as the dark age where information was kept until a certain time, but it's all out there. Well, Angela Nyamo, thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
And as the report, maybe on your parting shot and as we finish, anywhere somebody can get this information?
Well, this report is actually going to be made public tomorrow. Okay. We will be sharing some hard copies during the launch, which is happening tomorrow at 7 to 10 at the Lyco Regency. We're also active online. We have a Twitter hashtag, Twitter handle, Twitter hashtag, which is hashtag cyber child safety, sorry.
Okay, cyber child safety.
Yeah.
All right, thank you very much, Angela, for joining us this morning, and that's where we'll have to wind up the show. It is now 10 minutes to 9. Thank you so much for keeping us company right here on Morning Express, and it is now time for us to wind up and wish you all a fantastic day. Do stay with us right here on KTN News.